All right, very warm welcome officially now to our SAP TechEd workshop today. Thank you all for taking the time and for your interest in our workshop on creative analytic SAP Fiori apps quickly and efficiently. I'm very, very excited for the next 2 hours, what we will learn. I myself cannot create analytical SAP Fiori apps, but I might be able later on. And no worries, I will not guide you through the workshop. I'm Lena Stodal. I am part of the SAP community team and your technical host for this session. But I'm honored to have Reshma Varma joining me and guiding you through the workshop. It's a 2-hour workshop, and I am sure we will all learn a lot. Reshma is a software developer in the area of user experience development, and she was contributing to a variety and multiple Fiori element floor plans in the past, and currently she is the lead developer for the UI5 suite controls. And I am, as I said, super, super excited of learning more around the topic for the next 2 hours. The session is a recorded session, as I said. If that is for anyone a problem and anyone does not want to be recorded, then please drop now. Housekeeping rule-wise, you see we do have a Q&A at the bottom of the screen. If you want to ask questions, please do so in the Q&A section. But we do have like 3 modules, as Reshma let me know, and we can address questions regarding those bits and pieces, so to say, also within the workshop itself. So we will make sure that all your questions get addressed. So there is another one joining. Welcome. And if not, obviously the community is here to ask, to answer all your questions as well. But with that being said, Reshma, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Lena, and thanks a lot for such a great introduction to the session, as well as to the introduction that you gave me. Hello, everyone. I'm super excited to be here, guiding you through the steps that will, help you create analytical SAP Fiori apps from scratch with no UI5 or no front-end code written from your side. Yeah. So before we start, let me just take you through one important disclaimer. In case if you see any mentions of SAP Cloud Platform capabilities in any of our content, please be aware that as of February 2021, SAP Cloud Platform will now be available in either SAP Integration Suite or SAP Extension Suite. Now, with that, let's quickly jump into what we will be focusing on in this session. In this session, I hope to take you through 2 very important or basically game changer SAP Fiori capabilities, one being the Fiori Elements and one being SAP Fiori Tools. What does SAP Fiori Elements do? Fiori Elements are basically your flow plans or templates for the most common of the business use cases. Now, suppose you have an application that fits into any of these very common business use cases, like say, for example, you are a manager who wants to see an overview of all the items in your area, or you are a sales a procurement officer who wants to see a list of items that you've procured. So these are the most common of the business use cases, and we provide flow plans that cater to these business use cases. What Fiori Elements does is it boosts SAP Fiori development efficiency. And how do we do it? First of all, we aim at increasing the developer's productivity. Now, as an application developer, when you use SAP Fiori Elements to create your Fiori applications, all you need to do is focus on the business logic and backend services alone. You do not have to spend time or worry about how your UX will look or how your screen will look, because that will be taken care of by the Fiori Element flow plan. As a result, you also end up writing very less UI code unless of course you want to extend the flow plan or you want to do something on top of it. Yeah, this in turn ensures that there is very minimal development and maintenance cost. Now, since we are part of the SAP Fiori, uh, the suite, we do ensure that all the Fiori guidelines, any new theme that comes in, any new guideline that comes in along with the new themes, all these will be in compliance with the Fiori element flow plan. As an application developer, when you're using Fiori elements, you do not have to do anything from the application side to ensure that you are in line with the specification. Now, since the flow plans are centrally managed by us, all application that uses a certain flow plan will look and feel the same. So there would be a uniform user experience across all the applications that adhere to one particular flow plan. Now, apart from all this, we do provide some uniform features like, as you can see, the layouts, the navigation, searching, filtering, the variants, saving of various application variants. So all these are common functionalities that we provide across the flow plans, and even in the flow plans, we ensure that UX consistency is maintained. We also ensure that enterprise readiness is also your applications are always enterprise ready. And how do we do that? We provide accessibility features, multiple device supports, translations of the text that we see, ensuring that whatever we deliver is always enterprise ready. With that, moving on. So we have 5 standard Fiori element page types that increase the developer productivity. Now, like I said, why do we need a Fiori element, or why do we need these templates, right? So there are certain use cases, like for example, some involving providing an overview of items, some involving providing a list of business objects, some wanting to integrate an amount of analytics into this list of business objects. Sometimes you might want to drill down to one of these business objects, make some change, and then come back. Sometimes you might just need to do a list of tasks. Yeah. So these are the 5 basic business use cases that we try to address using the 5 different Fiori element flow plans. Moving on from the first use case that I mentioned, suppose you want to provide an overview of items. As a sales manager, you might want to see the KPIs of the sales. You might want to see the list of items that are being, the list of recent purchases that have been made. You might want to see the contacts of customers or of the suppliers. So in order to put all these informations together and get a bird's eye view of all the overview of all this information, we have what is called an overview page. An overview page gives you an overview of all the relevant data according to your role or your role in the organization. Overview page also acts as a jump point, or it's your first point when you start looking at, or this acts as a jump point to any of your further applications. Suppose you want to now drill down and look at just the list of all objects that have been purchased. This overview page or the cards inside the overview page acts as a jump point. Now further, moving on, when you want to see a list of all the business objects, so you, again, if you go back to the previous example, you want to see the list of all sales orders or sales order items. Those are all business objects and you want to see them as listed. You can move into a list report page. Here you see, you can filter out the list, you can see each of these lists, you can perform actions on them, and further you can drill down to a particular list, which takes you to my next template, which is the object page. In the object page, you can furthermore edit the particular object, create something, add something more, and then go back. So basically, it enables you to drill down, give you a very detailed idea of one of the business objects, and also lets you perform actions on them. Now, when you want to integrate analytics into, when you're showing a large amount of data, That is when analytical list page comes into picture. We provide graphical representation of the data, graphical representation of the filters, so that you have more insights about the kind of data that you're seeing. Moving on to the last Fiori element flow plan that we have is a work list page, which looks very similar to a list report, but here the difference being work list handles a smaller amount of data. Like, say for example, when you want to have a to-do list and you want to perform the tasks, yeah, so that would be a smaller amount of data that can be visualized as a list, and that's what work list helps you do. Now, as I already mentioned, SAP Fiori Elements provides enterprise-ready applications out of the box. And when I say enterprise-ready applications, they are very stable applications made out of the UI5 framework, also providing a lot of options or functionalities out of the box. Like, for example, the applications are fully accessible. We take care of the internationalization or the translation of the text that you see inside the Fiori element flow plan. We take care of the device compatibility, the responsiveness, how it integrates, the performance of each of these applications are heavily being worked upon. And on top of all this, we provide various functionalities which remain or which remain constant across all these flow plans. We have variant management functionality, which lets you save a particular state of the application, the search and the filter functionality, the actions that can be shown. So once you search, filter, and get a particular set of data, you can do various actions on these data, sort these data, export these data into an Excel, navigate to various page, and then do more actions on the particular data. So these are all functionalities that Fiori Elements provides out of the box without the developer having, or without the application developer having to write any piece of UI code or logic. Now, as I also mentioned, I'll briefly touch upon the tool that we would be using today in order to create SAP Fiori Element analytical an application based out of analytical list page. What I'll introduce you today would be the SAP Fiori tools, either in the cloud or on-prem. So in case if you are using the SAP hosted IDE like SAP Business Application Studio, you will see that the SAP Fiori tools that helps you create Fiori elements or any Fiori applications without, with utmost simplicity. You will see that those SAP Fiori tools are already embedded in it. You do not have to install a plugin, or you do not have to configure anything to get hold of these SAP Fiori tools. These are centrally administered tool repositories, and you can already access it in case if you have an SAP Business Studio application, Business Application Studio account already available. In case do realize that a developer, I would also want to use, say for example, I would want to go back to the traditional IDEs like the Visual Studio Code that we have. It also enables me to have, or it also enables me to develop in an offline mode, right? So we also have plugins for Fiori tools that can be configured in SAP's in Visual Studio Code, which lets you do, or which gives you the same capabilities that you have in SAP Business Application Studio. Moving on, a little bit about backend and annotations that gives you a lot more meaning, or that gives the data that you provide us a lot more meaning. I hope OData is something that is familiar to all of you. It is a protocol that sits on top of the HTTP and basically allows a standardized way of querying or fetching data. Now you have the backend data, you have various applications that are trying to fetch the data. Now it doesn't make sense for each of these applications to write a new API to fetch, query, or filter, or basically interact with the data, right? That is not standardized. But what OData gives you is a standardized method for the same. This ensures that any application that is trying to query the data queries it in a certain standard way. And what SAP Fiori Elements provides you is a connection with OData services out of the box. So say you have an OData service, running, you can already start creating an SAP Fiori element application based out of that. So these services, so suppose you have a service, you have a particular entity. This gives you basically a date. This gives you the data. But how can you make the data a little bit more meaningful? Or how can you add a semantic to the data? Make it mean something while you're showing it in the UI. Say, for example, you have a property called revenue. But the revenue as a property gets more meaning when you add a currency to it. Similarly, you have a property called email, which takes a string of characters, yeah? But it gets more meaning when it is actually shown as a link. And when you click on it, it actually opens up an email application asking you to, or prompting you to send an email to it. So how do we bring up the data, the very bare data that exists as tables in the backend? How do we bring it up on the UI with such meaning or with such semantics? This is where you get the ability to annotate the data. You can actually say that for, say, property X, property Y acts as a unit of measure or a currency, which ensures that these two come together, and now you can make proper sense out of the uh, out of the data that you see. Now, say, for example, if you want, like I said, again, if you want a property or a table, in a column in your table to be represented as emails, yeah, you can actually annotate them to be, you can actually annotate them to bring it up in that particular way. Similarly, you want multiple properties to come together as chart, the X and Y axis of a chart. You can do that by annotating, or similarly, columns of a table. All that is already possible. So what Fiori Elements does is it takes in the OData service, it takes in the OData annotations, which adds meaning into the data that you get from the service, and creates the UI for you. Now, how do we do it? Like I said, we generate the app from the OData service and annotations. What you see on the app is purely dependent on what is the OData service connected to your application and the annotations that are already available for the service that you have created, or it's already there in the backend. Like I said, the service exposes the data, annotations give meaning into the data, or says that the data should behave a certain way. And this is what the application developers have to provide. Now, we as the SAP Fiori element framework takes all the data and the annotations that we get from the backend, makes use of the SAP UI5 controls in order to develop flow plans such as what you see on the screen, which is a Fiori element analytical list page application. Now, you might actually wonder, now this is, you provide the data, we create the app for you. Now, how can you extend it? Of course, we do provide certain abilities to extend your application, the Fiori element application, in order to add your own application logic. So suppose you start with creating a standard page type, but now you want to configure, make it do something more other than this. You can actually configure the application to come up, say, for example, as a flexible column layout. You can add sections into your object page. You can add object pages and sub-object pages, which as per your requirement. And all this is possible on top of the standard functionalities that we already provide. At the moment, SAP builds of almost all the S4HANA applications that SAP provides, almost 80% of the new applications are built on top of the Fiori elements, meaning that 80% of the use cases are actually covered by SAP Fiori elements. Now, if you were to decide between what to use, a freestyle SAP Wi-Fi application or an SAP Fiori element, I would consider that this is the metric that you have to actually follow. In case if your use case, so when you start with an application development, you realize that your use case is actually very much in line with one of the Fiori element or with the templates that we provide. then the best option is to go with SAP Fiori Element. But in case your option, your use case is not in line, you have to make a lot of modifications on top of what is already available as standard features, then the option would be to go with freestyle SAP UI5 application. However, when SAP Fiori Element application increases the efficiency of the developer, because of course you wouldn't have to worry about the front end. All you have to think about is how you configure the backend services. Yeah. But with the SAP UI5 application, that wouldn't be the case. However, it gives you a high amount of flexibility to create and design the application the way you want. And when you look at the total cost of development and maintenance, considering that SAP Fiori Element takes care of your entire use case, your cost for maintaining the application, or at least the front end part of your application, would be very, very low, because the maintenance of the application or the template would be taken care of by the framework itself. Moving on, now I would welcome all of you to join me with the exercises. But before that, Lena, do we have any questions that needs to be addressed?
We have one question in the chat. Is this service also available in SAP BTP trial?
The Business Application Studio is already available. In fact, I would be using the BTP trial to take you forward on the exercises.
That fits very well. Perfect.
Great. So moving on. Yes, moving on. I hope the exercises have already been made available to you. I will quickly walk you through the initial steps of the exercises. In fact, I already have the dev space and the development environment already configured, so that we wouldn't have to go through those steps again. But I'll quickly take you through them so that we can ramp everyone up on the same. So the first, in case all of you have the SAP BTP trial, the first step would be, when you open the trial, you would be taken into this particular page, the welcome page, wherein you have Business Application Studio as an option already. So when you open this, you would be taken into the dev spaces page, where you can already create a dev space. Now, I already have this particular dev space which is running, and which is what I'll be using today. But for the benefit of every participant, I will quickly take you through how this can be done. So once you click on create dev spaces, you will have the options of creating dev spaces for various different types of applications. Since we will be focusing on creating SAP Fiori application, and since that is also the option that is auto selected, you just have to give your you just have to name your particular dev space. So once this is done, it will auto create the dev space over here, and it shows that my test space, my dev space is not running, or it's not starting up right now, because I already have one that is running. In case and of course, in case if you are doing the same set of steps, you will see that the dev space is created and it is already starting up. It takes a little bit of time to start up, but once it is up, you will see that the name of the dev space is highlighted as a link. You can click on it and move on to your Business Application Studio. Moving on, let me just. So the initial steps that you see inside the document that I believe is already available to you talks about how you can create the trial users if you don't have, and if you do, how you can reach the Business Application Studio. So once you've created the trial users, and you have reached your the welcome page for the SAP BTP trial, click, as I mentioned, click on the Business Application Studio link, create the dev space, and once the dev space is created and running, you can open the dev space. Now, once this is done, the next step would be to clone this particular object into your dev space and or this particular project into your dev space. Why would we need it? In fact, all the exercises, the solutions of all the exercises, as well as the data, the resources that you need to perform these exercises today are all within this particular project. I hope you all have this handy. And if not, please feel free to drop in the chat and maybe I can share as well. Lena, in case if anyone mentions that they need the link, just please let me know.
Yes, there is a question. Can you provide the instruction in GitHub, please? Can you share?
So the question, I can quickly share it in the chat. The workspaces in the trial account cannot be used for an unlimited period of time. There is I believe you can only use it for a month. Unless you extend your trial, but otherwise it's just a month that you can provide, you can use it for. So the Fiori tools are already available in the VS Code, but right now, but you do have to install a couple of plugins. So I would say for now, you can try it out in VAs, because if you already have a trial account, it would be, you don't need anything else to configure or to use the VAs. How do we create Fiori element using the Fiori tools that can be seamlessly shown through the VAs? So I would suggest that maybe for the sake of this exercise, you can use VAs, and maybe I can get back to you later on the plugins that you need to install in VS Code. Cool. So I believe I've shared the GitHub project, and anyone, oh, great. So I think you can already use the same in VS Code. So I will take you through the exercises. So once you have your dev space ready, the first step would be to clone this project, because like I said, you need this in order to get the resources. So you can come here, click on code, copy the HTTP link, and once in your dev space, moving into your dev space, you can click on new terminal and do a git clone of the same. Git clone and paste the link. I'm not doing a clone of this right now because I already have this cloned. And hence, when you are trying this out, please remember to do this step in order to clone the project into your workspace. Why do we need this? It is because in the exercises folder, in the exercise 1 folder is where we have all the resources that you would need in order to go ahead with your exercises. All right, so once this is done, in case if you're not able to clone also, do not worry, you can download a zip of this particular project, and once it is unpacked, you can drag and drop the same into your home, into the particular file structure. Now, once this is done, we can quickly jump into how you can create a Fiori element application. So assuming that all of you have the dev space setup ready, the project cloned into your dev space, the next step that you would have to do is start from a template. So this is where you come to in order to start your application. And once you come here, you have the option to select the type of Fiori application that you want in order to start with your development. So here I would be choosing SAP Fiori application. this gives me a list again. So you can choose between SAP UI Freestyle and SAP Fiori Elements. But when I choose SAP Fiori Elements, I'll get all the predefined set of the Fiori element flow plans that are already available. I'm choosing analytical list page because that is what we are going to see today, how to create an analytical list page from scratch. And this is where, so as you all know, so since we are not connecting to a backend today, we are trying to get, we have already created a set of mock data and a mock metadata, and that is what we are trying to fetch, or it is from the mock data that we will be trying to fetch the data from for today's exercise, for the purpose of today's exercise. Obviously, if you have a service configured, if you have any of this up and running, you can actually choose that. But for the sake of this exercise, I would recommend you to upload the metadata document from the folder that you, or from the project that you have already cloned. Now, once you choose this, in order to choose the metadata document, you can browse for the files you already have under your projects. You would already have the TechEd, which is cloned, TechEd project, which is cloned. Go into exercises, go into the first exercise, which is where we have all the resources. And from the resources, you can choose the metadata.xml file. So I think I would have to actually clone this once more because I just realized that I'm missing a particular folder. Great. So I can actually do this along with you. So let me just copy the project from the GitHub. Go to terminal. And then clone this into my projects folder. So this is inside. So once you open, you will be under the user folder. I've opened the projects folder within the user folder, and that is where I'm cloning my TechEd 2020 project. Now you see that inside your exercise 1, you have under resources both mock data as well as metadata.xml. And these are the two folders that you would require to fetch the data in today's exercises. So going back to the same steps that I did before, I'll choose the SAP Fiori application. Analytical list page. And while selecting the data source, like I mentioned, I'll choose the metadata document. And to choose a metadata document, I'll open the TechEd project, exercise, navigate to exercises, exercise 1, resources, and then choose metadata from it. All these are mentioned in the document as well as in the GitHub repository. You can go through the steps in case if you've missed out any in my when I do the steps. Now, in order to choose a main entity set, I'm choosing Z_SAP_MRA_SO sales order analysis as my main entity set. This holds all the relevant data that has to be shown, that we are planning to show today. And you can just keep the rest of the settings as none. So let us give a name for our project, the sales order analysis. So basically in this session, what we are planning or what we are trying to do is create an application that gives you a list of all the sales order items. As a sales manager, you can actually filter out based on the revenue that has happened on a certain date, revenue from a certain product, filter out orders that have gone in a particular date range, filter out the sales orders based on certain currencies and so on. And that, how do we do that is what I'll take you through today. So we are moving on to the first module of the exercise, which is creating the tables and the chart in the content area of your analytical list page. Do we have any questions?
We just had the comment earlier that you to slow down a little bit, but I think
Sure.
as you reinstalled it, I think you already repeated that step. I'm not so sure, but I think it's all good.
Cool. So if anything comes up, just let me know.
Yeah.
So, all right. Now, if you see, so once you've created this application, when you see, you already have a lot of modules that are already available. The web app already contains a folder for annotation. If you see, you already have an annotation file with all the references included. You have an internationalization file that would help in the translation. You have the local service file, which holds the metadata, mock server, and so on. Now, one step that I want you to do during this at this time is go back to your TechEd project that you already cloned. And within the exercise 1, where we chose the metadata from, there is a mock data folder that holds the mock data for each of these entities. What I want you to do during this time is drag the mock data folder and put it inside our local services folder. Inside the project that you've created under local services, you would have to basically drag the mock data from the exercises and put it here. Why? Because this is where we are trying to fetch the data from. Now, moving on, the first step would be to add a table into the analytical list page. Now, for this, we would be using the help of SAP Fiori tools for opening the guided development. This is a very cool feature, guys, and let me take you through how easy it is in order to add a table or chart, or for that matter, any of the UI elements into our analytical list page flow plan right now. So what you have to choose is adding a new column into the table. A column is nothing but a line item, UI line item annotation inside, a data field annotation inside your UI line item annotation. UI line item together comprises the table, and each data field within that brings up what you see as a column. So let me start the guide right away. So what it does is basically you are asked to enter the entity type and then the properties corresponding to each and every data field in your line item. Now, what the Fiori tool will do is to see if such an annotation exists, a UI line item annotation exists within this particular entity type. And if so, it keeps adding on to it. If it doesn't, it creates a fresh one uh, right away. I will demonstrate exactly how this happens. So once I've chosen the entity type corresponding to our main entity set, which is a Z underscore SAP MRA SO sales order analysis type. And participants, please don't, in case if you miss any of these steps, these are detailed out in extreme clarity in all the exercises in the GitHub, as well as the exercise document that's there in the project. So you can always go back to it. Now, once I choose this, I choose the first property being the delivery calendar year. So once you see that a kind of a mock-up of the annotation is already created, and once I click on apply, what it does is this basically adds the annotation into your annotation file. As you can see, the annotation file just opened up on the right side. I see that the data field is already added. I did not have to do anything in order, any hard work from my side, in fact, to get this added. All I have to do is now go back to the properties, change the property, choose something more that I want to add, and then add it. It takes a little bit of time to reflect, also depends upon your connectivity at the moment. I will be adding a couple of more properties here. Sales order. Sales order item. Next, I'll be adding the product. So make sure that every time you add the property and you have the mock created up here, you apply your changes so that it gets applied to the annotation file on the right side. Product, main product category. Quantity and net amount. So now what I've actually done is created the annotations for a table that contains close to 7 or 8 columns. All right, so I have created, so you see that the annotation file, it's auto saved. Every time you make a change, it gets auto saved. You don't have to do anything to configure that. Once I'm done with creating the table, I can quickly exit my guide and search for the next configuration, which is an interactive chart, adding an interactive chart or chart in the content area of the analytical list page. So I told you, when analytical list page shows such wide amount or vast amount of data, we also provide you a way to visualize it in a more intuitive way so that you can make more sense out of the data. This step has basically basically this guide has two steps, one which allows you to add the chart and the other which allows you to add a presentation variant annotation that basically binds the chart and table together. Now I'll take you through each of these steps. In order to add a chart annotation, first, again, you would have to go back and add your entity type, which is nothing but your main entity type, the Z underscore SAP MRA sales order analysis type, the chart title. So these are the following properties that you need to add for this particular chart to come up. So first, let's have the chart title, which is revenue by customer. Let me go back and copy the same thing for chart description. I want to have a column chart basically, because that gives me the I can see what the revenue of each and every customer is revenue that every customer has generated in the particular time. And in order to show the X and Y axis, I'm going to choose net amount as a measure and delivery calendar date, as well as sold to party, or basically the customer, as the two dimensions, or basically your x-axis. So once this is done, you can just see the mock-up of the your the chart annotation that you have defined right now. The chart title, the description, the type, the measures, dimensions, everything comes as one piece. Now, once this is done, don't forget to click on apply so that the changes get applied. And now you can move ahead to the next step, which is creating the presentation variant. Now, in order to create the presentation variant, the entity type is already pre-filled from the previous step. You can choose the sort order property as net amount. You can keep the sort order descending property as true, and whether you want grand total to be displayed at the top of the table as false for now, for the sake of this exercise, and keep initial expansion level as 1. So once this is done, I can again go and apply the changes. And once everything is done, I can exit the guide. The next step that I want to do is I want to add what is called a data label on the chart. And why is this so? We have received or we have noticed that, say, when you just have a bar like this, with even if the measures are actually defined in the axis, it might still become difficult for the user to actually visualize where or what is the actual measure value of this particular bar. So for this particular flights, you see that the cost is this, but you can't really know the exact cost until you go hover over it or until you try to measure it to see where it corresponds to on the axis. And that is why the measure, what it actually represents, has been configured to come up on the chart or on top of the chart or on the chart itself if there is space to accommodate it from the framework. So for this, what you have to do is choose the enable data label in smart charts and KPI cards guide, start the guide. The what has to be added directly in the manifest of your project is already added, pre-filled over here. I just need to choose the page to whose manifest this has to be added. So I choose the analytical list page over here, apply the changes. You will see that the changes gets opened up in a new JSON file. So basically this holds all the manifest related changes that will be done in your application. So since chart show data label comes up in the manifest, this has already been added. You can actually go to your manifest.json file, go to the application settings and see that chart settings have already been added once you added it into this particular JSON. Now, once this is done, you can exit the guide. And for the first time, you can actually preview the application that you've already created. Assuming, fingers crossed, that I've not made any mistakes in the steps, but assuming that everything has been added correctly, you should be getting a Fiori element application with just one filter, because we have a mandatory filter here for fetching the data. And then we have in the content area charts as well as tables. So as I said, you have one filter here. You can fill in the value that you want, click on go, and then wait for the data to load. Great. So we have all the data that you need. Like I said, so you have the data in the tabular format, you have the same data being represented in a chart format so that you can make more sense out of what you see, and you have the filter here in order to filter the data. Now, this brings us to the closure of the first module of the exercise. Here we have learned how you create the content for your analytical list page. And in the next module, you will be seeing how you can create filters, smart filters, as well as the visual filters, which are a unique feature of the analytical list page. Now, before we move on to the next session, I can take some questions. Oops.
There is no question regarding the content in the chat at the moment. If there is any question,
I can. All right, that's also great. I can slow down a little bit, maybe wait for a few minutes for the participants also to catch up with the first module of exercise. And in the meanwhile, if anyone has questions, please post in the chat and we can take that up. Or you can also unmute yourself and speak.
Did it work for everyone?
Yes, yes.
Thumbs up if it worked. No pressure, that's fine. I mean, that's good that we have that session recorded, because then you can have a look later on again. Like if it didn't work in the first place, it will surely work in the second.
Sure. And also one pointer for all you guys is, in case if you get stuck in any of these exercises, please don't worry. we have the solution also. So we have the solution of each of these exercises already available in the project that you have cloned. Say for example, so we finished exercise 0, 1, and 2. 2 was where we created the chart as well as the table. Now, if you want to, or if you want to get the state of the application, right? If something went wrong and you basically just want to copy the entire web application folder, what you need to do is just take the solution exercise 2, copy it, put it inside inside the app that you've created, or copy the entire web app and put it inside the app that you've created. It contains all the annotations that I've mentioned so far, the mock data that we already copied, the manifest changes that we already added. So there are multiple exercise steps that we did, right? Any of these steps, if it goes wrong, if you're not able to figure out, you can, of course, ask me or shoot a question to me later. But then if you also don't want to be stuck on the error, you can always feel free to copy the web app, put it in your app, and then run the same. It has the state of the application of all the files in the application at the end of each and every section that we cover. So I hope that helps you to not be stuck in a particular step so that you can also move ahead. All right, Lena, are we good to move on, or?
Yes, I think we are.
Great, that's good.
Yeah.
So the next module that I'll be taking you through would focus on how do you add filters. I'm pretty sure you would have already familiarized yourself with the normal filters, or the filters that I showed earlier, where you have filter fields and then you can filter the data based on it. But what analytical list page provides, which is different from all this, it provides the normal smart filters, but what it provides on top of that are what we call the visual filters, which is basically the filters that can be represented as in a graphical format. Say, for example, you want to filter down the customers who have made the most revenue in the last particular year. How can you do that with a normal filter? This becomes a lot more easy when you have a bar chart that lists all, say, for example, the customers that made the top 3 revenue in the last 1 year. So this is what analytical list page capabilities help us do. So for the next exercise, you can search in the guide for filter and choose add new filter field to filter bar guide. Now this lets you add the normal smart filter bar fields that you see on the filter bar for any page type. So in order to do this, what we will be doing is creating properties into UI selection field annotation. The selection field annotation is what gets translated into the filters in your filter bar, and every property corresponding to every property that you have added into the selection field, you will see a filter that comes up. So today, let's try to create almost 8 or so odd filters. We'll start with adding the entity type. As always, we will be choosing the Z, SAP MRA, SO, sales order analysis type. The properties. So let's start with adding a filter for delivery calendar date. So once it is added, like I've mentioned before, the tool actually looks to see if there is a UI selection field annotation already created. If so, it will keep adding on to it. If not, it'll create the entire annotation term and add the property to it. Now moving on, so we follow the same steps for 7 or so properties. I'll create one for sold to party, which is nothing but the customer. Product, main product category. Oops. I add one for product. So as you can see, every time I add a new property, what happens is, since the selection field annotation is already available, it just keeps adding onto the collection. Yeah, it doesn't create a new annotation term, but rather just keeps adding new and new property paths. I also add quarter, delivery calendar quarter, as well as order date. And finally, the last filter for the day, order date. And once this is done, we can actually see how your application looks like, or what your application looks like right now. As I've already told you, you do not have to save your changes. It gets auto saved in your annotation.xml. But once all your changes are done, you can exit your guide and move on to the next guide. But before we move on to the next guide, I want to take you through the changes that you can see once you've created the new set of annotations. Yes. Let me take you to the compact filter. Great. So as you can see, the application actually loads with this area. So this is your default view, which is basically where the visual filters come up. Now, since I've not configured any graphical representation of the filters or the visual filters, that's why it comes up as blank. So you can just go to the button on the top right and choose your currency to fetch the data, and then just wait for the data to come up. Now, of all the filters that you see, I want you to actually look at this particular one. Why? Because the next step is going to focus on this particular order date filter. Now, as you can see, this is a filter wherein you can choose a list of dates. Yeah. So over here, if you see, all the months or all the dates are actually pertaining to 2020. So let's go take 2020's data. Supposing I take the month of July and try to fetch the data, it'll give me the data corresponding to this particular order date. Now, what makes such a date filter more meaningful? Rather than choosing a date from a date picker or the calendar, how easy would it be if you could just say, okay, fetch me data from the last 1 quarter, or fetch me data from the last 2 quarters? This is what we are going to achieve in the next step, which is basically adding a semantic date range into your filter bar. Now, in order to start this guide, I choose the enable semantic date range on smart filter bar option. This is again a manifest configuration that gets added. So I choose the analytical list page for which I want this manifest configuration, click on apply, and wait for the JSON file to load. So you see that the JSON is already saved. I can go to the manifest, open the manifest, see that the filter bar date settings option is already in place. If you preview the application, you see that the order date, which came up as a calendar until now comes up as a field wherein you can actually say filter data based on the last 1 week's data, or filter something based on last 1 week's data or 2 months data, and so on. Let me quickly take you through the same. Now you see that the calendar doesn't exist. Rather, you have a date range that you can choose. I can say, for example, say last 1 year, Jan 1st to December 31st, 2020, and then click on go to fetch the data relevant to this particular date. And how intuitive is that when you want to fetch data for an entire year or entire uh, uh, quarter? You don't have to go select the dates corresponding to it. Rather, you just can choose the corresponding option. Well, now moving on to the next step, we will now see how we can create visual filters for our analytical list page. Now, in order, so the filter, considering that you've already filtered based on the word filter, you have the add new visual filter property to this. So as you can see, the visual filter, adding a visual filter actually, you have to perform 3 steps basically in order to add a visual filter. First, to configure the chart that comes up on the filter area. Second, to say how you want to visualize it, how do you want to sort it, how do you want to visualize it using the UI presentation variant annotation, and finally, how do you connect this to the filters on the smart filter bar using the value list annotation. What do these annotations do? How do you configure them? All these are there in the exercise steps, but let me quickly take you through what has to be done for each of this. Again, now since we are creating the visual filters, so the visual filters are coming from an entity that is not the main entity. It's coming from an entity specifically designed to fetch data for that. And that is why, unlike the previous steps, I am actually going to choose SAP MRA, SO, ALP, SLD order item type for this. Yeah. So please bear in mind that when you go through the exercises, instead of choosing the last entity that we were choosing until now, you choose the right ALP entity type, the right SAP MRA, SO, ALP, sales order item entity type in order to fetch the data. Why? Because we are trying to fetch the data for a particular property from an entity that is specially designed for it. When main entity gives you an overview of all the data, for filters, we always try to fetch the data corresponding to that particular filter value. And that is what we are trying to do over here as well. Now, let's say I'm creating a filter for quantity to actually filter quantity based on delivery date. Now, let's say I give the chart qualifier, which is basically a unique identifier for your chart. Give my chart title. Choose the chart type is line. The dimension property. Now you see that the properties are a little different from what you saw until now, because this entity is just for fetching data for quantity by delivery date. I choose the dimension as delivery date and the measure as quantity, which is basically the X and Y axis respectively. And then click on apply to make this come up in your annotations file. So as you can see now, a new target has been created for the new entity type that you added. The new annotation term chart has been created. And finally, the chart definition has also been added. Great, right? You did not have to do any of these configurations by yourself. You just had to go through the wizard. Now, moving on to the next step, which is creating the presentation variant in order to display. So this is what helps it get displayed in your filter bar. Now, once that is done, you can add the presentation variant qualifier, which is, again, I'm adding the same as that of the chart, filter quantity by date, and selecting the corresponding chart reference. So I'm saying that show this on the visual filter, and in order to show the chart, refer to this particular chart annotation. Once this is done, I click on apply and wait for it to come up on the annotations file. And once this is done, we go to our final step, which is connecting the visual filter into, or connecting the visual filter to your filter on the smart filter bar. Now, why do you need to connect between the two? Say you have a filter on your filter bar, which is date, right? You filter that. Basically, it's the same filter that we are showing in the graphical format as well. So you want them to be in sync. You want them to be communicating with each other to say that, okay, if someone selects something on the filter, the delivery date filter on one filter view, the other filter view also has to be updated to show the same. And that is why you need to map between the two. Also, you want to make the filter actually communicate with the main entity set as well. And that is where this mapping becomes very important. Now, while you are mapping please ensure that you're actually trying to map the property in your main entity to the visual filter that comes from your visual filters separate entity type, which is the second entity type we chose, right? So we start with the main entity. We say that for the property delivery calendar date of the main entity, I want it to map to delivery date of the other entity. Yeah. So for this, I would actually have to go back and uh, copy the collection path value. Give me a second. We are in which step are we in? We are done with the presentation variant. We are in step 24. So out of all the values that you have to add, you can choose the value from the table. I did not have this handy. That's why I had to come back to the GitHub project. So here you basically paste the collection path value that is there. So what are we trying to say? We're trying to say that delivery calendar date in the main entity maps to delivery date in this particular SO, ALP, SLD order item entity. So we map the local data as well as the data that is coming from the SLD order item. And once this is done, you can click on apply for the corresponding value list to come up on your annotation. Now, once this is done, your visual filter should be up and running, right? But let's do one more step before we actually see, or let's do one thing. Let's just see how the app looks now. What are the changes now that you will see or you will notice in the app now that the visual filter has been added? I hope at least that the bar that you were seeing is empty earlier would now come up with a box. Great. So now you see that there is an overlay and a message saying that it's unable to display the filter due to missing mandatory fields. That's because we have a mandatory field EUR that is used for fetching the data. And unless EUR is given, the data for the visual filter will not be fetched. And so is the case for the main filters as well. Unless you give EUR and filter the data, it will not come up. So great. So you now know that on July 30th, there were three orders that were delivered. July 29th, 5 orders that were delivered, and July 28th, again, 5 orders that were delivered. Now you can actually filter based on one of these and see how the data actually looks. And like I said, when you filter there, you not only filter the values in the content area, but the filter also reflects in your smart filter bar. So this is how the changes that you've done in this for bringing up a visual filter affects your application. Now in your exercise, you will see that there is an additional bonus exercise in order to create another visual filter. I will skip through that because basically we're following the same steps. And rather than creating a line filter, we're creating a bar filter. That is all. However, what excites me more is the next exercise, which is in order to bring semantic coloring into the visual filter. Now, what does this do? Let's if all of you can see my screen, you see that here you see a couple of visual filters wherein there is a color given to each of the filter points or the filter bars that tell you something more. So it basically tells you that the cost or for this measure and this dimension, right? The criticality of this particular measure point is good. For some, it is poor, which is marked in red. For some, it is critical. I mean, it requires notice, but it's not high priority. Some are great. Now, why is this important? Suppose you have a particular cost center and you see that the cost generated there is very high, right? Now, if you want to add more semantics, more meaning to it, you can actually provide a criticality so that the person looking into it directly knows that, okay, this is the data point that requires attention right away. I need to filter out on this particular point and then see what is happening. Imagine seeing a chart like this. If you look at the second chart over here, where actual cost by cost center is given. So you have some cost center where the cost is really low and it's marked as red. So as a person, a person, the end user of this application, I know for sure that the points that are marked in red are definitely the ones uh, that needs to be given attention to right away. So visual filters lets you visualize and filters the data more meaningfully. Adding semantic colors to visual filters gives a lot more meaning to it, gives more additional meaning on top of what you already have. Yeah. Which gives you an understanding of what you have to do, how critical certain things are, and how you want to navigate through your application. Now, let me start the guide and take you through what all has to be added. Now, in order to add the criticality, the first of what you should add would be a data point annotation. The data point is where the criticality is defined, and I'll associate this to the chart annotation that I created earlier for quantity by delivery date. Now, again, going back, the data point would be on the same SOALP entity type, SAP MRA, SOALP, SLD order item entity type, the new data point parameter. So now I actually create parameters to bring up data point. These values are already there in your exercise sheets. I say that the data point value is quantity because if you remember, the measure of our chart, the y-axis of our chart was actually quantity, and that is where, or that is the data point that I want to compare with the criticality, right? I make the improvement direction as maximize, which is basically saying, okay, this is, do you want to maximize the measure, minimize the measure? What is good if you maximize it, minimize it? And finally, I add the tolerance range low value as 5 and deviation range as 4. So basically, I'm giving some thresholds for the criticality calculation so that once the data comes up, you can see how each of the data points will be reflected with the color. Good. Oh, so I have to actually go back because if you remember, I didn't apply the change. So I just made the change and kept. I can click on apply for it to apply and wait for the annotations page to load. It loaded with the data point. Great. Now moving on to the next step. Now you will actually have to associate the data point to your chart annotation. Now, if you remember, we had already added the chart annotation. Basically, we'll be re-adding those values again. Filter quantity by date. If you want, you can actually go to the annotations terms and just add the association in the chart annotation term. But here I'll show you how you can do the same via the guide. I had quantity by delivery date as a chart title. I had the same as a chart description. Chart type was line, dimension property was delivery date, measure property was quantity, And now there are some additional values, which is chart measure attribute property. So since I'm associating the data point to the measure, I would choose the measure, the earlier defined measure here, and give the data point reference. Now you can see how or what has been added. In the earlier chart annotation that we added, we just had the definition type, including the dimensions and measure. Now you see that there is an additional property value, which is the measure attribute, that contains or that tells you what the measure is again, and also what is the data point that has to be associated with it. Now, once this is done, you can click on apply and see how this changes the annotation, the UI chart annotation, filter quantity by date by this change. So as you can see, everything else remains the same, but just the measure attribute gets added. Now, once this is done, all the steps are done, you can exit the guide and see how this would change how your application looks like. Let's wait for the application to load. As you know, the filter comes up with no data because there are missing mandatory fields. I go to visual filters. I can also add it in the filter dialog that came up there, but I just wanted to show you how the main content looks like. I can switch to the visual filters, and now you see the visual filter data points or the quantities coming up as colored. These calculations, so you just gave the criticality, you said you want to maximize, and you gave some thresholds, and the colors got, or the coloring happened based on our internal logic. Now, as the end user of this application, I know for sure that, okay, this is the particular filter that I want to give attention to right now, because this is what is colored as critical. Each of these thresholds have certain meanings, and a combination of these thresholds are what is used in every criticality calculations, and the same is used for bringing up the different colors over here. Now, another capability, a very super cool capability that we have in Analytical list page right now, is the capability of shortcuts. In case if you are a Windows user, when you are on any field in your smart filter bar, clicking of enter would trigger a search. You don't have to go anymore. Even if the go button is enabled, just clicking on enter or return for a Mac user can enable the filter search. Similarly, when the focus is on anywhere inside the visual filter, be it the entire visual filter, the value help button, the various data points inside the visual filter, wherever you are, a control enter for a Windows user or a command enter for a Mac user will again trigger go. Like I said, it makes it a lot more useful, because say you are on this data point, you click on this particular data point, the filtering is done, you do a command enter or a control enter, the data is actually fetched. You don't have to go back to go, you just have to do the shortcut. Now, similarly, wherever you are on the application, doing a shift control S opens up the share popover. And why is this important? Whenever you want to save the state of this application as a tile, or send this as an email, send the state of this application as an email, this is the popover that you need to open, right? So wherever you are on the application, Shift Control S or Shift Command S, if you're a Mac user, opens up the share popover. Similarly, another very interesting shortcut that we have is or is on the table side, wherein, say for example, you are anywhere inside the table, like your focus, the focused element is anywhere inside the table, right? So right now I'm on the table row. Now if I do a control comma, right, and control comma is the shortcut combination for Windows as well as Mac users. When I do a control comma, I'll see that the personalization dialog, the dialog that you see over here, that opens up. You can do whatever personalization you want, change the columns, do a different set of sorting, filtering, anything is available from this personalization dialog, and you can access it with the shortcut control comma. So that brings us to the end of of the second module, which is basically wherein you have seen how you can configure the filters, be it the smart filters or the visual filters. I have just one small module before we wrap up the session, but are there any questions?
From the chat, it seems like it's all clear.
Great. I hope the steps are all clear. Maybe I can wait for, say, a few minutes if you need to catch up with the sessions. But if not, that's also fine. You can always go back to the recording or the documents that have the exercises. I can also take in any questions that you want right now. Maybe you can unmute yourself. You can put it in the chat. We are open to questions. All right, assuming there are no questions, I'll move on to a very uh, another module that we have, which is more like a capability of the Fiori tools, right? And this helps you with your, and this particular tool that I'm going to show you is what is going to help you with translations and internationalization. Now, if you see here, if you look at the problem, so either you get the problems here inside the problems tab, or you want to open it up, you can click on annotations, go to view and select problems. Oh, that just closed it because it was already open. So I'll just click on it once again so that the problems view comes in. So if you see, there are 5 problems that are mentioned in this particular view, and all are related to the translations not being available. Now, when you click on these, right, you see that these are all referring to certain strings that I've added, the title string, the description string that came up on the chart. So all these are translations that I added, but which doesn't have sorry, these are texts that I added, but which doesn't have a translation. And why is this important? Obviously, not every end user would be a native English speaker. You might want to, if you want your app to be delivered in an area where maybe the user might not be a native English speaker, you might want to translate it to German, to Spanish, any language that you want to. But how do we provide that? And that is where the internationalization properties or the I-18N files come into picture. Now, I had already opened the I-18N files before, but this had only the translations for the application name and the description. Now, let's see how you can add translations for each and every text without you actually having to add key value pairs by yourself, right? So I click on the first problem. The problem gets highlighted and there is a bulb icon next to it. When you hover over it, you get the option to show the fixes. When you click on it, you get a quick fix, which is basically to generate a key and substitute the text with that key, right? So basically they've created the tool is smart enough to create, auto-generate a key and then assign this value to it. The moment you do it, you see that a small change has happened and then the annotation gets saved. I can actually do the same for each and every error over here, and then see how this affects your I18N file. Let me go to each and every file and fix it, and then open the I18N files. Now, you see that for every field or for every translations that you did, a translation property has been added over here. For everything that you added, a translation property has been added over here. You can also actually choose to change the key value pairs that are already there, or say suppose, so if you see you have revenue by customer, default, and quantity by delivery date. You can either come to I18N properties. If you're not satisfied with the key value pairs that were auto-generated, you can always choose to change it. And you can have, I mean, you can do the same from your annotations file. There are certain ways that you can actually open the I18N files being inside the same view or closing this view. Say, for example, if you do a command click on this, it directly takes you to the I18N properties file and to the key value pair corresponding to it. Similarly, you do a command click on this, it directly navigates you to this particular key value property, right? And you can change it. But if you want to stay in this view and you still want to open the I18N properties, you can do Alt F12 if you are a Windows user, and an option plus function F12 if you are a Mac user. So let me click on this particular, like let the cursor be here. I do an option function F12 that basically opens up that part of the I18N file for me where the change can be done, and I can easily change it over here. So that is, so these are the texts that were coming up in your application. And once you provide the I18N properties and you enable the translations to take up, you will see that now the chart title in a different language, when run in a different language, will take up that particular translated value. And it is as easy as the developer, it is as easy in order to configure the translation or the translation file, it is as easy as just fixing or doing the quick fixes for your string text that you added, right? I hope this, and with this, we come to the end of this of the workshop, of me showing you what has to be done for the workshop. I know it was a very quick walkthrough, but I wanted to take you from one end to the other before the session actually came to an end, so that at least you see how this can be done, right? There is one more bonus exercise wherein you configure an object page. You can also, as in when you get the time to do the same, you can also go through it. The exercises are extremely simplified and very understandable. The steps can be followed the same way as it is given, and you can achieve it as well. But since we were focusing on analytical list page, is also why I decided to skip through the particular exercise. All right. Do we have any questions? Great. I'm open to taking questions right now before we move on to the final parts of the slides. I hope the exercise and the steps were pretty easy and you guys were able to follow it. And do let us know when, you know, if there's anything that you want support with.
Seems like we're pretty good with the questions.
That's interesting. That's interesting. Okay, so Lena, do I go ahead with the slides or wait for a few more minutes?
I mean, I guess you can go ahead with the slides, and if there's still questions, you guys can just put them in the chat and unmute you. But I guess we can continue. Yeah.
We can also have a dedicated Q&A at the end if there are any questions that needs to be answered, and go ahead. Uh, so three things to remember about SAP Fiori Elements and Fiori tools, or if I have to reiterate what I mentioned until now, there are three basic takeaways from this session. That SAP Fiori Elements and Fiori tools accelerates app development. I mean, look at this. Probably I started the exercise around 3:40, and maybe 45 minutes before, or maybe an hour before. Let's consider I started doing the exercise an hour before, right? And within an hour I was actually able to create an end-to-end analytical application. It gave me a list of items, it gave me a chart displaying the same list of items, it gave me filters. I was able to create visual representation of the same filters, add more meaning to it by providing the semantics. And say if I'd taken half an hour more, maybe I would have been able to create more filters or more capabilities like the object page drill down, right? So you realize how easily you were able to develop the application, which otherwise would have taken days or maybe even weeks, right? Uh, and the second point, the second major key takeaway would be the UX consistency. Since if you look at any analytical application created out of ALP, analytical list page, you see that they are all the same. They all adhere to the SAP Fiori guidelines, and they all look and feel the same. This ensures that any application, not let's not just talk about analytical list page. So suppose you consider any other flow plan like the list report, the object page, the overview page, or the analytical list page and work list, you will see that the common features the features that are common to each of these will actually look and feel exactly the same. So we ensure UX consistency so that the end user has a hassle-free navigation throughout each of these applications. And like I mentioned before, out of all uh, out of all the new SAP S4 HANA applications that are created, almost 80% of the applications were covered by SAP Fiori Elements, which means that 80% of the use cases or the development scenarios were already covered by SAP Fiori Elements. Now, I also have a couple of links over here which will help take you to the community topics page, the product announcement page for your SAP Fiori tools, SAP Fiori development newsletter, wherein you get to know what are the new things that are coming up in Fiori, the SAP UX engineering YouTube channel, wherein we put up channels, we put up videos regarding various development topics, and of course the Open SAP course for SAP Fiori overview. So these are a couple of uh, 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 topics that maybe you can check up later after today's session and learn more about what's happening in the area of SAP Fiori. With that, I come to the end of this session, and I would encourage you to, in case if you have any requirements for SAP Fiori Elements, or any need to communicate, I would recommend you to get in touch with my area product owner for SAP Fiori Elements OData V2, Mr. Suneet Agarwal, and he would be happy to help you out. So that brings me to the end of today's session. Everyone, it's been great walking you through the exercises as well as walking you through the various sessions here, I believe. And I'm open for questions, and over to Lena for to let the participants know of all the resources.
Yeah, I'll go back on camera now. Thanks, Reshma, for that wonderful session. Very insightful, very impressive how that can be done. And yeah, we have officially 18 minutes left. If there is questions, then please raise them now. I already posted links to our SAP Fiori community tutorial into the chat, and also the SAP TechEd tag. Go ahead and follow it if when you're in the community. And there is more workshops regarding SAP TechEd planned. I also posted the link for it there. And as I said, the recording will be available to you with the slides from Reshma very soon.
Great. And in the meantime, since we have the time, I'm here, open for questions, open to take any questions that you guys would have.
There is one question regarding the recordings. They're on our SAP Community YouTube channel. I'll post the link. They will also be on the SAP TechEd site available, so you won't miss them.
Hello, everyone.
There we go.
Great. Lena, just a quick question. So this would hold the entire exercise that we have shown today, right? Recording the entire meeting, whatever has been recorded would be there. So anyone can actually go back and go through the steps again in case if they want to see what was done and how, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Great.
Right. I think if there's no questions for now and all was clear and all worked for everyone and it looked exact the same way as Reshma showed it on her screen, then I guess we can close the workshop and close the session. And I thank you, Reshma, for your time and for that thoroughly working us through creating the Fiori app. And I wish everyone a wonderful rest of the day. It's lunchtime here in Germany and the sun is shining in now. Either it's also half a day through for you guys, or you're at the end of your day. Have a great evening or a rest of your day, as I said, and hope you all stay healthy.
Great. Thank you so much, Lena.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.